Good morning. My name is Aaron, and I'm the servant of God and minister for the Church in Tennessee Ministries, or the Church INTN. I want to thank all those out there that are watching, no matter where you're at, and I hope you enjoy the message. When last we spoke, we were talking about, we were talking about fornication, and the scripture, passage of scriptures that we're using is 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter. Now, I wanted to go back over fornication and sort of make clear what my position is on that matter. It intertwines with a lot of other material subject matter that I really don't want to touch on, because you got to give a full explanation when you're up here in the pulpit or when you're up here giving a message. Part of the problem in the pulpit right now with most preachers, most pastors they're not taking the time to actually expound correctly on their message, because they're not taking the time to study the message, to study all the nuances of scripture, to study the references and material that go along with it, so that you can give a clear, concise message so that the people can take it back in their own life and use it as a skill set to navigate life and to be able to use it for wisdom in their everyday walk. All right. So when we last spoke, we talked about what a lawful union is. All right. And a lawful union is you and God, woman and man in God, or just a woman and a man. That is a lawful union. All right. So you can't really speak about or expound about, give me one second. You can't really talk about fornication without talking about marriage. I also don't want to talk or get in depth about marriage, but I do need to touch on it to some degree. Now, the way that God viewed marriage was a woman and man when they have an attraction to each other, and I'm talking about in this day and age, and they're sincere in their want for each other and their desire for each other, and they join in a monogamous relationship. That monogamous relationship should have its completion in marriage. That is the position of the Bible. Now, we went over Genesis 2:22-24, Malachi 2:14-15, Matthew 19:3-5, Mark 10:6-8, Ephesians 5:30-31, and they show forth the same thing, that when a man leaves his father and mother, he shall cleave unto his wife or his woman. That word gune, which is in Greek, and the Hebrew word for wife, can't remember right now off the top of my head, but either way, in the Hebrew, excuse me, it was the same word that was translated wife, woman. All right. In fact, let me look at that real quick. It won't take me but a second. It's the same word that they translated wife, woman, and they would say when you joined unto a woman, that would be your woman or your wife. And the reason why they would differentiate in the English translation is because of the betrothal process, which would indicate that you move from one status to another status. 1 second here. Yeah, how could I forget that? It is the word woman. I don't even know how I could forget that, but in any event, it happens. Ish. Shaw. Alright. Man is Ish. Also Adam, which means red or reddish man, and Ishashah, or Ishah rather, means man. Okay? So, you have a lawful union. Anything outside of the scope of that union would be considered fornication. All right. Now, there are a few prevailing views about fornication. When we're talking about fornication, we're talking about cohabitation or premarital sex. All right. And in the Bible, there are a couple of scriptures that I think sort of, I would say, touch that subject, or comes as close to that subject as you're going to find in scripture about shacking up, as we would call it. So those scriptures are, let's come over here. In Exodus 22, I believe it's 21 through 22. No, Exodus 22, 16 through 17, and then Deuteronomy 22, 28 through 29. Now the Hebrews, God gave the Hebrews through Moses, through the mouth of Moses, God gave the Hebrews a very elaborate system of law, a system of judgments that are to be executed whenever need be. They needed laws to be able to understand how to cohabitate with one another, to have a society of people that would be an example to other nations around them. In fact, in Deuteronomy, I believe the 12th chapter, no, it's not the 12th chapter, I think it's Deuteronomy the 4th or 5th chapter. He says, give me 1 second. And 4 and 5 says, behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, and you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. All right? So, this verse right here, Exodus 22, 16, 17, it touches on fornication as best as we can find anywhere in Scripture. And so, in Exodus 22, 16, 17, he says, and if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. Surely endow her to be his wife. If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed, meaning they have not engaged in the marital process, all right, that's what made the marriage legal, the betrothal process during that time. So if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses him, then he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. All right, so let's break that verse down. In fact, we're going to go there. Yeah. All right. When we're talking about he enticed, right? The man entices a virgin, some father's daughter, right? I want to put it that way because that's how it is. Every woman was some father's daughter at some point in their life, right? So if a man entices a woman, entices her, right? that is not betrothed and lies with her, if he seduces her, isn't that what's going on in today's society right now? Well, it's going on both ways right now. I remember when I was growing up, they would call it having game. So, if a man was able to talk a woman out of her skirt, then they would say that man had game, or they would say that man is a player. If he got that woman to do the same thing for money, they would call that man a pimp. All right. So during this time, during this age, if a man in the nation of Israel, the Hebrew Israelites, if they entice, this is one of their laws, if they entice a woman, a maid or a virgin, someone that still had her virginity intact, if he enticed her and she was not married, okay? Because it's a whole new ball game if she's married. If she's married, he's going to be looking at he may be looking at something, he's going to be looking at a lot worse, a lot more severe penalty. All right. Excuse me. So if he enticed her, she's not betrothed, right? He entices her and he lays with her, then he shall surely endow her to be his wife or his woman. So what that means is that you can't just sleep with this father's daughter and think that's going to be the end of it. So fornication was frowned upon, and this would be considered fornication unless the man had intentions on marrying her. So it wasn't a severe penalty of death, okay? But he would have to marry her. There would be a price to pay. Why? Because you had sullied or tarnished this man's daughter. And during that time, a woman's virginity or daughter's virginity, a daughter's name in their society meant something. And God put value on the woman. He put value on a daughter. The daughter held a special place in their society, in the family network. And we have to understand that. I don't know how much that means right now in today's society. It's hard to say right now with what you see in social media from what women and men do with their children, what women and men do with their daughters. Excuse me. I'm not talking about as far as acts of pedophilia, but some of the things, some of the actions, some of the things that you see on social media, some of the skits that you see kids doing, I don't know. I don't know how much value is being placed in that area. I don't know how much value is actually being placed on a child. In any event, we can consider that fornication by today's standards. All right? In Deuteronomy, well, let's go to the second part of the verse. Now, the father, being the head of the household, was also the Lord of the household. Now, that's not the same. The head of the house, father being the head of the household, that may not mean much of anything right now. I don't know. I think that in some instances that does stand. In other instances, not so much. I work in a field where I get to see how much a man is esteemed in his household. So when we say head of household, Lord of household, when we talk about the male energy, that's that new term that we're using right now. And I think it's a less abrasive term. That's why it's being used more often now. The male energy. I'm sorry. When we talk about the energy flowing throughout the household, that's the term that's being used right now. I don't know if there's a lot of male energy flowing throughout the family's household. Well, for one, in some instances, the man is not present. Which I've said this before, you can drive a car with your feet, but that doesn't mean you should. doesn't mean the results are going to come out. The results are going to come out to your favor. All right. So in a household, I think you do need, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the Bible is concerned, I think you need a man and a woman. I think you need that present, the character that is natural to both of them to raise that child in the way that they should go and upbring them in the right way with standard and morality as the core and the rule of how they should live their life. I think that's necessary as long as that's present in the parents as well. Okay? So now, if the father utterly refuses the man, he sees something in the character of the man, he may not like the man, he may just decide that, no, my daughter's not marrying you. Then the man is still going to have to pay, because he can't leave scot-free without sullying and tarnishing the daughter of this father, making her less desirable to any other man that may want to woo her or have her hand in marriage, because the state of being a virgin was highly esteemed back then, and it may still be highly esteemed now. But during that time frame, it meant something to be a virgin, to keep oneself chaste, to relegate and regulate one's passions, to subdue one's carnal nature. That meant something back then for the daughter. All right, the daughter meant something to the household. This is why the man could not leave scot-free. It would almost be like a court of law, where you would have to pay some sort of restitution for your actions. And so we're talking about civil laws regulating, civil and legislative laws regulating the whole state of Israel. And let's keep in mind, I need everyone in the audience to understand, everyone viewing, Israel and the church were one. Okay? There was no separation of church and state. The state was the church was the state. It's that simple. That rule was for the whole state, was for the whole people. If you went through the naturalization process in Israel, in the land of Israel, then you were going to abide by those laws. That simple. And you would suffer whatever penalties that the law required that you suffered if you did something wrong to break those laws. The God that you were supposed to worship in Israel was Jehovah God, Yahushua, Yeshua, Jah, whatever name you like to venerate him by, that's who you're worshiping if you're in Israel. Now, if you're not in Israel, you can worship sun, moon, sun, moon, stars. You can worship the trees, all the host of heaven. But if you're in Israel, that's who you were supposed to worship. Okay. So if you laid with a woman that was not betrothed, that was a virgin, that was a man's daughter, you were going to have to pay the price. This wasn't a man that was prostituting out his daughter. No, that's not why you paid the father. You paid the father was because this was the restitution for selling and tarnishing her reputation. And we'll see that it wasn't a small fee either. So it was going to cost you. But the main point is we see that the end of that act was supposed to be marriage. Okay, well, if you valued her enough and you looked at her and she was attractive enough for you to lay down with her, well, guess what? She should be attractive enough for you to marry her. That's how they looked at it. You slept with my daughter? Okay, that's fine. Then you should be willing to take care of her. Now, not so much now. Right now, you got, we run around here and we're sleeping with every Tom, Dick, and Harry like it's a taste test. I mean, people are having sex like you passed out pamphlets. It's not even an issue. And listen, I get it. We're just trying on clothes to see if they fit. If they don't fit, we put it back on the rack. The position of fornication is if you slept with a woman if you slept with her, then in Israel, you were to marry her. All right, that was the law. If you look at Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is the second time that Moses is reiterating this law. Basically, that's what it means. All right, so when you look at Deuteronomy in 22, 28, 29, it says if a man found a virgin, excuse me, if a man finds a damsel, I'm sorry, and she is a virgin, or that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, okay? If a man finds a damsel, okay? Make sure I'm clear. If a man finds a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, meaning she's not married, and lay hold on her and lie with her, and they be found, that man shall pay the father, the man that laid with her shall pay her father 50 shekels. These verses sort of go hand in hand. That was the dowry of virgins, 50, at least 50 shekels of silver. 50 shekels of silver, all right? And she shall be his wife. Excuse me. Because he hath humbled her. Give me a second here. Because he has humbled her. He's brought reproach on her. He's brought shame to her. All right? He shall pay the father 50 shekels of silver because he's humbled her. And she shall be his wife, and he may not part from her all his days, meaning he can't divorce her if this happens. So there was a heavy price to pay for fornication in Israel. If you slept with a woman, you weren't going to just get away with tarnishing her reputation or selling her. The point being made is this, is that if you sleep with a woman, the way that God views it is that that woman, if she was good enough to sleep with, then that woman is good enough to make your wife. Now, the problem with that is the ideology of individuals today differ greatly. And so it makes it difficult to go through that whole process. I understand that. However, when we're talking about fornication, and when I say fornication right now, I'm not talking about the letter of the law, and this is an important concept for people to understand. During the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, all right, you had the letter in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, we're talking about the Spirit. So the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. So when my position on fornication is under the understanding of the spirit of the law. Because where the spirit of the law is, there is mercy. Where the letter of the law is, there is not. And in the Bible, in 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, or 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, it says, the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. Let me read that real quick. That's 2 Corinthians, actually, the 3rd chapter. 2 Corinthians 3:6 to be exact. All right, it says, verse 6, who also have made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. the strict adherence to the law is what we're talking about when we say letter. So when we're talking about fornication, or when I'm explaining fornication, and I believe that this is the position of the Bible, it's talking about a heterosexual relationship, a monogamous relationship that should have its consummation and fruition in marriage sooner than later, which helps to prevent fornication and adultery. That's the position, because we're talking about the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. As we see in the Old Testament, if you slept with her, then you need to endow her to be your wife. All right? Deuteronomy, if you lay with her, if you lay hold on her, you lie with her, and you be found, you should pay her father 50 shekels of silver, because you've humbled her. You've brought shame to her, because in a Hebrew household, and in some households today, even in America, a daughter was a man's. The woman and the daughter during that time frame was highly esteemed, was very valuable to the family. This is the purpose for the money to the father. One reason is for restitution if he doesn't want you taking his daughter and daughter's hand in marriage. Okay? And the other reason is because you're taking someone that's highly esteemed from my family. And what often happens is he'd give part of that money to his daughter anyway. But the point is, there was a heavy price to pay for fornication, for just laying down with a woman. If you took her hand in marriage or if you didn't take her hand in marriage, there was a price to pay. You couldn't just run around sleeping around. 50 shekels of silver back then was probably a lot of money. At the height of its price per ounce, if I'm not mistaken, it was silver in the late 70s was 48, I think 48 bucks, 48.5, $48.50 an ounce, I think. Give me a second. Yeah. In the late 70s, when you look at inflation, that price probably goes up the further back in time you go. 1800s, 1900s, you'd have been talking about 60,000 bucks, something like that. If I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, if I'm not mistaken. In the book of Jeremiah, it talks about Jeremiah buying a field for 30 shekels of silver. Whole field, right? Like if we look at the dollar bill in the 70s, hey, I'm from Chicago, you go to Aldi's, you can get a whole meal for at least 2-3 days for a couple of bucks. Bread was like 20 cents. Milk might have been $1 or 50 cents, something like that. I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but something like that. So there was a price to pay. You couldn't just be running around sleeping around with women without being held accountable. And again, it's not like today. Today it's very different. It's not frowned upon. It's not even an issue. All right? So that would be anything outside, again, the scope. Anything outside the scope of this lawful union is considered fornication. It's fornication if you have no real intent on being united with the woman. It's one thing to sleep with her and your intent is to be with her. It's another thing just to sleep with her and you just want to, be a union, but you want to just try it out for a little bit with the reservation of skipping out if you want to. Yeah, that's what's going on in this day and age. However, So according to the spirit of the law, if you sleep with a woman, the end of that, if you sleep with her before marriage, the end of that should be marriage. The consummation for that union should be marriage. Now, again, it should be sooner than later. But my job is not to regulate anybody on that. My job is to give the understanding as much as God has given me. Now, next time we come back, we're going to see what's wrong with fornication. What is the problem with that? So the understanding of fornication first is anything outside of the scope of a lawful union. That is fornication. I like to use Kittle's phrase on this, quoting Kittle. He said, copulation without communion is fornication. Copulation just means to have sex. And so in this day and age, where people are running around trying each other on like hats, I think it's good for the church to understand what this is, for the church also to understand that we have to live by his rule, because his rule is life. For his words are spirit and they are life, in John the 6th chapter. That life is the light of men. The light will shine into darkness. The darkness will not comprehend it. Only the light will. Excuse me. So I'm about to stop. We'll come back to this. Just keep in mind, again, these two verses, I think, epitomize the idea of shacking up, cohabitation, premarital sex. And this is how God looked at it. So we're not looking at this from the letter of the law, and that's why my position on fornication is anything outside the scope of a monogamous union. Not per se marriage. However, I'm not advocating for you to just continue to just sleep together without going forward in the process of a legalized union in the eyesight of God. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for, I hope you did stay for the whole message. Please be safe out there. Be blessed. Make sure you watch your surroundings. Make sure you pay attention to your children. Make sure you train them up and raise them in the admonition of the Lord. Thank you, and until next time, have a blessed day.